Hi, and welcome to my channel. My name is Matthias, and welcome to a new tutorial. We are entering complete new territory for me, this time a little bit different than usual, as I have to get used to speaking to a camera and speak more freely, without having a script I'm just reading. By doing so, I hope we can react a little bit faster than in the past. I try to make it as less painful as possible for you. But bear with me for the moment as I still have to learn a lot. In my work with my students, I noticed that the biggest problems aren't in direction of creativity, but how to make it sound good. Mixing is the biggest problem, not the sound creation itself, and because of that, I created a little demonstration project that we can have a look in a real-life scenario and have a look how to mix from start to finish. Let's dive straight in. Okay, here we are in the project, just a simple one, that this video doesn't get too long. This is how it sounds now, completely unmixed. Every single channel in the mixer is empty. I just adjusted the volumes that the limiter will react as little as possible. So let's have a listen. As you can see, the limiter just reacts a little bit when some hits coming together. And this is what we are aiming for. Again here, I set the volume just a little bit that the limiter reacts, a tiny bit that we have the most possible volume without squashing everything. As you can see, we already have here a lot of volume going on, a lot of loudness going on. This value of minus 10.3 LUFS is already more than most of the streaming platforms allow. And this without squashing the sound at all. This comes purely from the mix. So here we are back into the original starting project without any processing at all. As you can see, every single channel is empty. And the first thing to do is to clean up the sounds individual. Some might have too much low end, which isn't necessary for their sounds. Some might take too much space in the spectrum. These we have to limit. The first one, because it's the anchor point of your complete track, is the kick. So the first thing we do is that we solo the kick and just have a listen in isolation. What we need first is an EQ plugin. And let's have a look about the spectrum we see here. So there are already many frequencies happening here below the 30 Hz. And so we can raise the high-pass filter even more to get some headroom here in the lower area. The main focus of a kick drum lies between the 50 and 100 Hz region. And this is the region where we will boost a little bit. That we have a nice solid low end. The next part is more about cleaning unwanted frequencies. So many sounds carry information which aren't really necessary or even wished to be in there. And we're taking just an EQ band reducing the Q a little bit. Please do not get absolutely steep, because then you will only end up with whistling sine waves, which will sound very ugly in any way you try to use them. Leave the Q a little bit more open and don't raise the volume up to the top. This will resonate like crazy and you will end up eliminating frequencies which aren't that bad when you hear them in a normal context. Just to have a listen what's about in this region here in between the actual click of the kick drum and the bottom end, which we want to have in any case. So many kick drums, even or especially when unprocessed, have many problems in the region between 120 and 200 Hertz. There they have some kind of boxiness, which often sounds ugly. Many kick drums, on the other hand, many samples, are already processed and not that bad in this region. So this is, for example, one of the kicks which was already processed. Otherwise you would hear this knocking on wood much extremer than you do in this case. Nevertheless, it can clean up the kick even more if we just slightly reduce this peak here. Yeah, about the 170 Hertz. This is a good region where we can make some room for other stuff, respectively get out some sound we do not like or we do not want to have. So it's not a big difference, but it cleans the sound up a little bit more. Another part I personally do not like is in this region here, where the kick drum has a little bit of too much saturation, too much distortion. So let's have a look when we clean up this region here. Yeah, this is the sound, this higher knocking I want to reduce just a little bit. Let's leave it here, and please note that in the context afterwards, when we mix everything, some of our settings have to be revisited again and controlled if they're still valid. So this is just a first cleaning up, a first impression how the sound can change. At the very end, for me, this kick drum sounds a little bit undefined, especially in the low end. So I try to use a compressor to define the shape of the kick drum a little bit more. Let's have a look what we can get out of it. So first, to have an impression about the timing settings of the compressor, I overdo the settings and have a listen how the timing changes the sound. So especially directly after the click, there's coming in some sound which I do not really like. I want to have a defined click at the beginning, because this is nicely cutting through the mix when everything goes more dense. But I don't want to have this higher on wood knocking. I don't know if I describe it correctly, but have a listen when I raise the attack and let more of the initial transient come through. So in this region, there's coming in some parts of the sound I do not really want to have, and which I can reduce by lowering the attack. So now I got only the click happening here inside. The release is an important timing setting as well, but in this case, when we just have a normal 4 on the floor drum, especially at the lower tempo at 125, there's enough space for the compressor to release to full volume before the next hit kicks in. And this is completely enough. When we have a timing around 100 milliseconds, we will avoid any distortion of the envelope. But it's quick enough that we have released the compressor completely until the next action starts. Of course, the setting was overdriven, so we will back it up that we just define the region we really want to have compressed. So about here. But at the very end, it's a matter of taste. It depends on which type of sound you're after. The next part is, shall the EQ come before the compressor or shall it come after? So this is how it sounds when it comes before, where the sound loses a lot of its bottom end, because this is especially the part which is ducked away by the compressor. So when I go the other way around, it sounds more full, but you can already see, because we had taken away the volume the parametric EQ added, that we have to adjust our threshold completely new. So with the compressor, so let's gain stage a little bit. So this is about the same volume, but especially when you listen to the initial transient, there's a huge difference having this compressor inside or not. The attack is far more defined. The kick is snappier, it's more punchy, it's more in your face. Okay, let's leave it with that. About stereo-ness of the kick drum, there is some stereo in the top end, but this will not bother us. When we play this sound in mono, it will not lose any bottom end, it will not lose any impact. And so we do not have to treat the stereo-ness of this sound. So a little bit of the high-end sizzle goes away when we put it in mono. So it seems on the attack there's a little bit of reverb, but this shall not bother us. So the second most important part is the bass, of course, because kick and bass together, this is what gives us the foundation of our track. Let's have a listen to the bass in isolation. This bass sound is quite boomy, so this is as well a part we should bring under control. Let's open an EQ again. So let's leave it first with these settings here, and now again we try to use a compressor. Again, like with the kick drum, it enhances a little bit the attack of the sound, makes it a little bit more clear. But these are very minor differences. The most important part we have to do is to sidechain the bass to the kick drum. The bass isn't allowed to play together with the kick. And as you can see here in the MIDI, there are some notes which landing on the one. And this we have to duck away that the kick can play in isolation and the bass is just supplying everything. So what I use just for the sake of getting this tutorial not too long is I use my favorite VST plugin for this, Shaperbox. But you can do exactly the same, for example, with the Fruity Envelope controller. And for example, for ducking, you can use the frequency splitter, as I already showed in one of my videos. Or you can use the Fruity Balance plugin, whatever you like best. So here I go with a classic sidechaining shape where the first 16th of the sound of the bass sound is completely ducked away. There is no permission for the initial or for the most part of the sound to cut through and interfere with my kick drum. So when I play both together now, the kick drum and my bass, you can see where the bass is already ducked away when I disabled the shaper box. Yeah, you can clearly see when kick and bass are hitting together. These are the spikes which are coming up here, and these are the parts which will make problems when you try to push the volume into regions where you reach enough loudness for competing with others. Even if some claim the loudness war would be over as soon as you want to have your tracks played in a club or played at gigs, you have to match a certain loudness, otherwise the DJs will not play it. So we leave the sidechain decking for sure enabled, and we move on to the next part. So the next part would be the open hi-hat. And especially with hi-hats, it's often astonishing how much lower frequency content the samples contain, especially these samples which aren't pre-processed. Of course, there are many samples out there which got this processing already included. But when we have a listen and a look into the frequency spectrum of this open hi-hat, you will see how much space a hi-hat can occupy in the lower regions. So these are all frequencies which aren't absolutely not necessary for the character of this hi-hat sound. But these are interfering with other sounds which use these parts as their main area. And these frequencies here, which aren't necessary for the hi-hat sound, are taking away energy from sounds which are prominent in these regions. So what I do is I take a high-pass filter. I mostly use the steep 4 order. And if you change it from the default preset, please make sure that on this band you go to this little bandwidth knob and reset it. Originally, this bandwidth, because it's in the default preset set as a shelving filter, is set more to a flat response, and this causes the filter to react too early. So this is the spot here. Can you hear the difference? What you do normally is you take this high-pass filter and you raise the frequency until you clearly can hear that the sound gets filtered, that it's getting thinner in sound. This is the point you're looking for. So up to 460 Hertz, there is no difference in sound at all. But when I reach the 500 Hertz, the sound gets immediately or changes its character a little bit. Yeah, here it's a huge difference to here. Anyway, a hi-hat can benefit from even be more concentrated on the high end. So perhaps with this sound I would go up to this region here and see what space we made available for other instruments which were before occupied by this only hi-hat sound, which doesn't even need this frequency for being clearly a good sounding hi-hat. The next part we have to look at, especially with open hi-hats, is open hi-hats have often very resonating frequencies, which do sound whistling, squeaking, and this is not necessarily something we want to have in our sound. So what I do next is to go again with my method here, a little bit steeper Q. And here, for example, you can already hear this whistling of this resonance here. And this doesn't sound necessarily very good. So alone this little dip makes this hi-hat already much cleaner sounding than before. It wasn't very noticeable before. When you relax your ears just a second and do not have this hi-hat in mind all the time or hearing all the time, and I disable this filter for now, when I start playing you will not immediately notice, oh, there's a bad frequency. But once your focus is on this frequency, because I take it away and bring it back, then it's clearly noticeable that this frequency wasn't necessarily a wished part of this hi-hat. So I personally like it much, much better without having this whistling sound here. The second part, when you look at the shape of this open hi-hat, it is very, very dominating in between 5,000 and the upper range of the frequency spectrum. What we need to reach is having a little bit more body of the open hi-hat, that it doesn't just playing very thin on top of that. This is as well a mistake many beginners do when they are told they shall high-pass filter any sounds. High-pass filtering doesn't mean automatically I shall overdo everything. So what I do in first place is I take out as much frequencies as I can, but without making the sound sounding too thin. So when I go higher with this high-pass filter here, it stays, of course, an open hi-hat, but compared to this state, it sounds getting too thin after all. Many are going, for example, up to here and leaving just the upper sizzle. And this would be far too much. So we already cleaned the sound up very much compared to here. As the next step, to get a little bit more body, or perhaps pronounce even more the attack the initial transient of the open hi-hat, we try a little bit around with the compressor. Let's see what we can come up with. Yeah, here you can already hear the difference, how much longer the sample got now. But I'm not sure if I want to have this initial clicking. Because the compressor is pronouncing too much the initial transient. So in this case, I wouldn't go with the compressor. So what might help instead is going with the wave shaper. So what I do with the wave shaper is I try to clip off the top end a little bit of the sound and instead trying to raise the body having underneath. So the first step I do is I raise the pre-gain because we're quite low in volume and compensate for this with the post-gain. Still a bit too much. Okay, this white line here indicates where our signal sits at the moment. So carefully to stay more or less on the same line and the same 45-degree angle, I push this node a little bit down and as well this one here. This will clip off or cut off the most loud peak of this sound. And what I try to do instead is to bring in some body now. So this is what I wanted to do. I wanted to give the sound a little bit more body after all. The sample got a little bit longer in sound, but without having this extreme clickiness and the transient where the stick hits the open hi-hat. This sound I do not want to have here inside. I find it personally too aggressive for this open hi-hat. What nevertheless this treatment revealed is that perhaps this resonance here underneath could be a little bit dipped as well. So it's let's have a try with the EQ so that you hear what I mean. So it's about this sound here. And let's have a look how it sounds when we just lower it a tiny bit. Yeah, again, the sound got a little bit more clean. Okay, that will do for the moment for the open hi-hat. Let's move on to the closed hi-hat. And again, first thing we do is inserting in EQ. And here you can see a perfect example for a sample which was already processed. So here we do not have any bottom end in the sound, but nevertheless the sound is a little bit too clicky and a little bit too high focused. So please imagine that our hearing is reaching from 30 Hertz, theoretically up to 20 kilohertz, but in practice, the most usable range is up to 10K. Everything on top is really just sizzling noise. which we need sometime a little bit to have an impression about the highs going on, but it's mostly useless information. So the first thing I do is trying to restrict this very high peak here with a low pass filter. So, and there, it's often a good idea to go with a lower bandwidth. So, and instead of having the focus just on this very high region here, which is nearly at 15,000 Hertz, I want to try to bring in some body of the sound as well. So just to get sure, I can even set my high-pass filter to this region that I really can get sure there's nothing underneath. Okay. I do here the same trick with the wave shaper, because I fear when I use a compressor I will have this clickiness again, the clicky attack when the stick hits the metal. So again, I will chop off the topmost transient. Okay, so this would be my closed hi-hat. The next part is about the clap. Again, first action I do is inserting an EQ and having a look at the frequency spectrum of this clap. As you can see, it's already processed as well. Just to get sure, I do my high-pass filtering similar to what's existing at the moment. Perhaps a little bit attack. Okay. So the next sound is a snare, which I, on purpose, chose a more tonal one, because this clap is just quite noisy and I wanted to have a little bit more of a tone inside. When you get tonal percussion, you really have to make sure that these tonal percussion matches the key of your song. So when we hover over the topmost peak here, this will give us a good hint at which pitch this sound reaches our ears. And this says it's an E. Our song is an A. So we either need to pitch it down or to pitch it up. In this case, I would more going pitching up than down. So let's open the channel rack and I go to this little wrench icon here, where I can change now the pitch of my sample by just right-clicking the other keys here. So now, one semitone above, we are at an F. Now we went to an F sharp, but we want to an A. So this should be this key. No? Yes, it's an A. So this is the setting where I leave it here. So this is where you have to trust me for the moment. So this will match afterwards the key of our tracks very nicely. After having adjusted the pitch, we again go with an EQ. And here you can see again how much bottom end this sample includes. And this would all interfere with our bass and our kick. and would push the signal into the limiter without having any use for us. So again, grab your high-pass filter and raise it until you got rid, at least for the frequencies under 100 Hz. These are completely exclusively reserved for kick and bass, and no other sound playing together with the kick and the bass is allowed to be played in this region here. This is an absolutely strict rule. Everything else is matter of taste, but nothing beside the kick and the bass is allowed to play in this region here. And again, just in this region here is the first spot where I can tell that I used a high-pass filter. So again, coming from here, have carefully a listen. Not before the 500 Hz mark, I could identify that I used a high-pass filter here. So, and why shall I leave all this mud inside of the sound if I cannot even tell that I took it away? Of course, you hear it now in direct comparison that there was more low end, but for the character of the sound, you can easily high pass it up to here. And I can even restrict the high end a little bit more, because the main focus of this sound lies in the tonal transient here, in this region. This is the main focus of the sound, what we want to have to make our clap a little bit more round sounding. So I'll just leave it with it here and go on to my other tonal sound. And this is again chosen on purpose to bring some tonality to all this combined clap snare sound. And again here we have to have a listen or to a look where our pitch sits. So, and here we are on a G. I want to have this sound, on the other hand, pitch down to an A. So this is quite a lot of pitching, but nevertheless, it does the job very nicely. So I pitch it down to this key here. Yes, this is the key I want to have. So what says the other one? This is a D. And here we have a G sharp. But when you have a look for the pitch, it's always the lowest, highest peak. So, and this would be this region here. This is what we hear as a pitch of the sound. And this is just an underlying sound we don't have to treat very much. This will be low in volume afterwards and shall just give a little bit of body to the whole sound. Again, we use our EQ. We take out unnecessary low end from the sound. And here we can go even lower with the low pass filter, because from this sound I just want to have this tonal part here. Okay. So the next part are our chords. Again. What I often use is this GVST clip, as it has a nice display where my peaks are sitting here, and the clipper has the big advantage that these very tiny clips which appearing here on the top, these little spikes, there is no difference. You cannot hear them if they are present or not present. Please don't use a limiter for these, as the limiter would just push down the volume in this moment. This clipper chops them just off, so it will not change everything underneath. It will just clip off the top peaks of the sound. So you can even go with a little bit of softness, which includes a little bit of saturation. If you go too wild, no, it doesn't even harm the sound. So let's leave this this G clap here, sorry. And what I want to have is a little bit more of a movement. Yeah, this fits the rhythm better. Okay. Let's start from the beginning. This is our melody. And again, my clipper. So this clipper allows me to go higher in volume before the limiter would react, because these little spikes otherwise would already force the limiter to push down the whole signal. And to prevent this, it's always a good idea to chop off the parts you cannot hear anyway. And this is what we are doing here in this part. So what I, on the other hand, like to do is I want to have some reverb. So perhaps like this. This should be enough for the initial cleaning of the sound. And what we do now is we let everything running. And I turn down all volumes of all other tracks. The kick is the only one we are allowed at the moment to hear. The kick is the anchor point of our sound, or of our song, as I said already. I want to have the kick ending up at about -6 decibel in peak volume. This shall be enough headroom for all the other sounds coming in, that we don't clip the master here. So let's have a look where we are at the moment. Nearly there. So this is my initial starting point in terms of volume. This kick drum sets the complete relationship for everything else which comes in. So what we will do now is bit by bit, coming from nothing, raising the other volumes until we hear that it fits the way we want to have it. Especially important is, of course, the bass sound, which we have here. We will always use an analyzer to check what we are doing. Especially when it comes to kick and bass, we will use the high resolution mode, because this high resolution mode allows me to see more details in the low end. So just have a listen here and have a look that we are peaking at the moment in the low end at minus 31.2 decibel. And when I bring in my bass, I don't want to have this peak any higher than it's at the moment. Remember that we sidechained the bass, so it's not playing together with the kick. So when I set now the level of my bass and this peak will rise, then I set the volume of the bass too loud, which might be intentional in some situations, but for the most part, the bass shall not be louder than the kick, but only in the lower region here, not regarding the peak values. The peak values can be completely different. We just want to have a look about this frequency here. So this bass is very spiky and pops out a little bit. So here we don't want to restrict it too much. It shall be hearable, but we are mostly in the same region as we were before. Yes, some frequencies poking out a little bit, but this shall not bother us. At the very end, not the analyzer is the most important measure, but our hearing, and this bass can easily play at this volume. This is even a little bit peak volume wise, a little bit below the kick drum. So the kick drum is at -6, we are here perhaps at -8. This shall be fine for the beginning. So the next part I would bring in is the clap. And here we change back to our default mode. So I would say about in this region should be fine. So this I just want to have very low as a little bit of atmosphere, matching the snare, the rhythm of the snare. Okay. And as you can see, especially now the hi-hat here is raising this part of the frequency. We are here at a slope. Let me stop the music for a second. We are here at a slope of -4.5 decibel, which equals to pink noise level. So when we would play pink noise through this analyzer, the pink noise would show us a straight line. And this is how our hearing reacts to the different frequencies. This means to have the best balanced mix. Everything should be on a one horizontal line, while it turned out that if the bass frequencies are poking out a little bit more, this is often a good thing. But everything else, from starting from the melody instruments over the snare and claps up to the hi-hats, shall be on one line. And we have to take care, especially the hi-hats are very good suited for this, that we do not set them too loud, that they start to poke out too much in this region here. This region is for our ears very tiring. So when we listen too long to sounds in this region with too much volume, we cannot tell anymore that these sounds are actually too loud. But when you come back the next day and listen with fresh ears, you will immediately hear that something is start to pierce your ears, that it sounds unpleasant and harsh. And this we can prevent by setting the levels, especially in this region, right, and do not go too high with the hi-hat sounds. So perhaps about here. As you can see, I left a little bit more space for the kick and the bass, which I allowed to poke out more. This region here we fill now out with the chords and the melody section. But especially this region here is very important. But you can all still hear this little piercing attacks which are coming through. So what we do on the group channel for all the percussion sounds is that we first insert a second EQ. So perhaps taking out a tiny bit of the high end. Again, high pass filter it to a place where it doesn't bother in any way the lower regions. And what I want to do is to put another wave shaper on. I'm not the biggest fan of glue compression with on such percussive elements, because this often pronounces too much the transient of the actual sounds. I like to go more with a wave shaper, which creates a more smoother sound without over pronouncing the attack of these sounds. So again, I go this way here and I start to clip off the top end or the spikes of the topmost transients, and I raise the volume back again. You can see when you got a quarter circle more or less, this often, especially for percussive elements, turns out to work very well. So let's gain stage it. No, that's already perfect. So this shall be our bass treatment for the percussive sounds. So let's continue with our instruments. And here, after bringing the chords in, you can see another phenomenon, that because the chords are playing basically mostly on the one, they start to interfere with the kick as well. The more I bring in the chords, the kick gets a little bit weaker. It doesn't have the same energy as before. Just concentrate completely on the kick. The bottom end of the kick starts to disappear a tiny bit, and this is not the behavior I want to have. So what I do as well here on the chords is these chords have to be sidechained as well, but not as much as I would do with the bass. So, and especially here, the method with using the frequency splitter in FL Studio and triggering with the envelope controller is as well perfectly fine as using just the multiband feature here in plugins like Shaperbox or LFO Tool or what you prefer. So I set first my ducking shape. I do not go as much as I would go with the bass sound. So a little bit more gentle it can be. And this ducking I don't want to have on the complete chords. I just want to have it on the bass or on the lower region of my chords. So when I play it now, just leave it at this settings. The same will happen with my lead instrument. So here I can already go the same way. I can already insert a shaper box here. I can go with more or less the same shape I got on my chords. Because here will happen exactly the same. If I leave the low end in, it will interfere with the bass frequencies of my kick. Let me turn down the master for a second that you can hear my voice clearly. And here you can see the problem which some sounds create. The lead sound here, and I show this on purpose to demonstrate this feature, has sometimes very strong resonating peaks coming in this middle region here out of the normal spectrum and are interfering with the ceiling we have set here. So this is what we want to treat with a dynamic EQ, because this doesn't happen all of the time. This happens just in certain situations, and we don't want to take with a permanent EQ away frequencies which could be in other situations beneficial, but is only in this moments shall be pushed away. This is what dynamic EQs are absolutely perfect in. So on this channel here, after all our processing, we put in a dynamic EQ. Doesn't matter if you use the free Nova from TDR or if you have another plugin you want to use. And here as well in the spectrum you can see which regions are really poking out, and especially these two or these three here. They are very dominant, and this is the region where we want to act a little bit with a dynamic EQ. The problem is just that these frequencies are as well responsible for this squelchy character of the sound. We have to do a little compromise here. We have to push them a little bit out of the way that they do not poke out so much, but on the other hand, they shall not disappear completely, that we do not destroy the actual character of this certain sound. So as you can see, this is already quite good under control here. There is here and then coming up a little bit a spike, but this shall not bother us at all. But before, these frequencies here, they landed about on this peak. And this we have already reduced with the dynamic EQ I tried to remove these spikes here as well, but they interfered or they destroyed too much the squelch character of the sound I've chosen here. So, and I tested with higher loudness, and this was perfectly fine to push it up to the -6 decibel region without having any problems at all. So going to my master, if we now have a look here at Yulin, as you can see, the limiter is barely kissing the surface of our wall of sound we created here. We are already at a short-term LUFS under -10, which is absolutely fine for all streaming services. Already went perhaps a little bit too far for them, but we didn't squash the sound. So what shall we reduce to increase the loudness more, that we match more the -12, -15, -16, which some streaming services demand for the upload? This is just a short example, of course. Here it's lacking all the blips and blobs you would have in normal tracks, or the transitions, the crashes, the FX sounds, different melodies, different layers for all this stuff. This should be a basic overview, because you have seen the principles are always the same. You need an EQ on your tracks, because you have to make sure there are no frequencies inside you don't want to have. The more you clean up your sounds, the less problems you have afterwards to reach louder regions in terms of loudness. Often it's a good idea to compress, but sometimes even not. If you notice that compression does at the very end the opposite you want to have, try to find other methods to change the dynamics of the sound, like I did with this wave shaper here. The golden rule for every electronic genre is at the very end to be able, at least, to go into higher loudness regions. Just that you have an impression how it sounds when we push things even harder. What we want to reach is a loudness of -6 LUFS. So let's have a listen. I'm not stating this is the best mix in the world, but it absolutely does the job. Perhaps when you push it to the limit, there are some parts you might adjust afterwards. For example, now I would reduce the reverb on the melody section a little bit, or perhaps on the clap or the snare, the transients are a little bit too much for the moment. This is everything which you can fine tune afterwards. But nevertheless, you see how easy basically it is to reach the same loudness like all the professionals do. This is no magic. You have to give every sound its own region to play in. And then you can do anything you like, and you will not end with too much distortion. And you will have a really lightweighted mix, which is following the same rules like you were always told, that you have to have a balanced mix. A balanced mix doesn't mean anything else than if you take this helper line here in span, this horizontal helper line, that all the sounds are more or less on the same level through the whole frequency spectrum. Let's have a look. The span is after our final limiting. Let's have a look after all this work where we end up. As I said, the only problem here would be this ARP sound, as it spikes a little bit above, but at the very end, as you can hear, it doesn't cause any problems. The last part you have to check afterwards is how does it sound in mono. I didn't do any mono treatment at all. As you can see, there's nothing involved. Or here I did a little bit of widening, and here I did a little bit of panning. But this is really all. On the individual channels, there is no stereo processing at all. There's just EQs and limiters as we have used before. I just play it a last time, and let's have a listen how it sounds in mono. Of course, we have to make sacrifices. All the room information is lacking now. But when you listen carefully to this video, if you rewind a little bit, you will notice that every single element stays hearable. Even if I, on purpose, let the chords disappear a little bit behind the rest, because in mono we have less space we can use, because it's just one channel. We cannot use panning at all and everything else. The melody is far more important than the chords. The chords are just supporting in this moment. We need to have a clear kick and clear bass. We need to have clear percussion sounds, and we have to have a clear melody. And this is everything this master provides. As I said, this is not the end of the line. This video shall end at some point, which is reached now. And I hope it gave you a basic impression what the different processing on the individual channel is at least necessary to reach in higher loudness regions without causing too much distortions. Have a great time, stay tuned, and I hope we can continue with this format, that I get rid of this silly writing a script and you allow me to speak freely, and I improve on speaking freely and can show you perhaps in shorter amount of time more content. Thank you very much for watching. Bye bye.